Welcome to the world of water. Water is a precious resource, and we take it for granted that water will flow when we turn on a faucet. However, some states and other countries do experience water shortages. In East Central Illinois, we want to make sure that we will always have reliable supplies of clean water. The Mahomet Aquifer Consortium has prepared this presentation on sustainable water supplies in East Central Illinois. The consortium is a not-for-profit organization based in Champaign and is devoted to educating people about sustainable water supplies. Here are 4 good reasons why each of you should care about water supplies. Every day you need to drink clean water, and you use a lot of water at home. You need a water supply that you can count on every day. Neither you nor your neighbors owns water. Water is a common resource that we all share. As you will see, we extract water from various parts of the environment for our use, and you can help protect the environment. About 1 million people live in East Central Illinois, and how much water is used depends entirely on the actions of each person, including you. There are 3 parts to the presentation. First, we need to understand the region and the factors that affect water availability and water use. Second, we will quantify how much water we use today and how much we will need in the future. And third, we will get a better handle on what we mean by sustainable water supplies. So we start by talking about East Central Illinois. The East Central Illinois region includes 15 counties from the Indiana border near Danville westwards to the Illinois River. From east to west, major towns are Danville, Champaign-Urbana, Decatur, Bloomington, Springfield, Pekin, and Havana. There are 2 sources of water: water on the Earth's surface and water below the Earth's surface. Surface water occurs in rivers such as the Mackinac, the Sangamon, Salt Creek, which flow westward into the Illinois River. The Vermilion River flows southeastwards into the Ohio River, and the Kaskaskia River flows southwestwards to join the Mississippi River below St. Louis. The area around Champaign County is the headwater area for these rivers, but here the land is too flat to build reservoirs. Further downstream, Danville, Decatur, Springfield, and Bloomington do obtain their water from reservoirs, and dams have been built across these rivers to store large amounts of water in the reservoirs. Below the surface are aquifers, which are thick layers of sand that store large amounts of groundwater. The largest source of groundwater is the Mahomet Aquifer, which extends across the region. Many communities obtain groundwater from the Mahomet Aquifer, and some from smaller, shallow aquifers. Is your community one of these? Champaign County withdraws some of the largest amounts of groundwater and also serves communities outside the aquifer. Other communities that are dependent on groundwater include Gilman in the north, Rantoul, Hayworth, Lincoln, Pekin, and Havana. In addition to these communities, water supplies thousands of families living in rural areas who have their own private wells and pump water for their own use. In our region, about 22% of the water comes from surface waters, that is, from reservoirs. Some 10% of the water, mainly for use in private homes, comes from small, shallow aquifers, less than 100 feet below the surface, and about 68% of the water comes from the larger and thicker Mahomet Aquifer, which extends down to as much as 350 feet below the surface. The aquifer is about 200 feet thick. Do you know where your water comes from? Illinois water law governs how we can extract water from the environment and use water, but the law is not always easy to interpret. We have already noted that nobody owns water. We all share water resources. If you own land and want to withdraw water from a river or drill a well to withdraw water from the ground, you do need a permit to ensure that the construction meets state standards. However, you do not need a permit to withdraw and use water. The law says that it must be reasonable use, not wasteful use. Of course, that leaves the barn door wide open as to what reasonable means. Conflicts are settled in court, and there are no state standards that limit how much groundwater you can withdraw. Rainfall, surface waters and groundwater are linked together through the water cycle. When rain hits the ground, some of it runs off the land and fills the rivers, lakes, streams and reservoirs, which are surface waters. Some of the rain slowly infiltrates the soil and becomes groundwater, which is water in the ground. Rainwater infiltrates the soil and slowly recharges the aquifers. An aquifer is an underground layer of geologic material where sufficient water is stored for it to be withdrawn for useful purposes. The Mahomet Aquifer is mainly sand, and groundwater is stored in the spaces between the sand particles. The aquifer is not a fast-moving underground river or an underground lake. Several hundred feet below the surface, water is under great pressure, and an aquifer is more like a solid sponge with groundwater packed in the spaces between the sand particles. Ultimately, sometimes over thousands of years, groundwater discharges into the rivers and streams and surface waters. From there, from the land and from the oceans, water is evaporated back into the atmosphere. One circuit of the water cycle is then complete, and the cycle continues. So you can see, we need to understand climate, geography and geology in order to tap into nature's water system, and we need to take a long-term perspective. So let's start with climate and rainfall. Each year, on average, we receive about 38 inches of rain, but sometimes there can be too much rainfall or not enough, creating floods and droughts. Average summer rainfall in Springfield is about 12 inches. 1988 was a drought year, and summer rainfall in Springfield was only 4 inches. 5 years later, in 1993, summer rainfall in Springfield was 20 inches. These two satellite photographs above the juncture of the Illinois, Mississippi and Missouri rivers near St. Louis dramatically show the impacts of climate variations on surface water supplies. In 1988, lakes and rivers dried up. In 1993, widespread heavy rains caused water levels to rise and rivers to flood. Even more severe droughts occurred in the 1930s and the 1950s, and it is a recurrence of these worst-case droughts that water supply planners must be prepared for, as well as for global warming. Here we see how Lake Springfield dried up in the 1988 drought. We now examine how climate changes long ago shaped the geology of the region and its water resources. Some 20,000 years ago, we were in the middle of an ice age. and much more of the Earth was covered by glaciers than today, shown here as the white areas. The glaciers spread southwards from Canada and covered much of northern and central Illinois. The glaciers gouged the landscape and filled the valleys with layers of sand, gravel and clay. This slide shows in a much simplified way a vertical slice of the geology about 300 feet down from the surface, from the Indiana border in the east to the Havana lowlands near the Illinois River in the west. At the bottom, several hundred feet below the land surface, is solid bedrock which formed hundreds of millions of years ago. Over the past few millions of years, glaciers have deposited layers of sand on top of the bedrock, and the sand forms the Mahomet Aquifer. There also are some shallow layers of sand above the Mahomet Aquifer that serve as shallow aquifers. In the central and eastern parts of the region, clay was deposited above the layers of sand. Clay particles are very fine and tightly packed, and water moves down through the clay only very slowly, perhaps an inch a year, to slowly recharge the Mahomet Aquifer below. In the Havana lowlands, the sand comes right up to the surface. Farmers need to withdraw large amounts of water from the aquifer to irrigate crops in summer. But because there is no clay to slow the downward movement of water, rain soaks down into the ground very easily and recharges the aquifer much faster than in the central and eastern parts of the aquifer that are covered by clay. Finally, I would like to thank the many people in these organizations who have contributed material and advice for this presentation. You can access additional information on the Mahomet Aquifer Consortium, the Regional Water Supply Planning Committee, and the Illinois State Water Survey at the websites shown here. Thank you for your interest in our water resources.